The morning sun rose over Kagoshima in the spring of 1944, painting the sky in shades of red that seemed like a premonition. Takashi Yamamoto was only 19 years old when he arrived at the Naval Air Base, his worn leather bag containing everything he owned: a photograph of his mother, a letter from his younger sister, and the small wooden charm his father had carved before dying in the rice fields. The base was buzzing with activity. Dozens of young men, most of them between 18 and 22 years old, walked nervously through the hangars. Takashi observed the Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters lined up on the runway. They were beautiful, elegant, with their silver fuselage reflecting the morning light. He had dreamed of flying since childhood, but now, standing before those machines, he felt something different. Fear, perhaps, or the intuition that his life would never be the same. Commander Saito appeared at the entrance to the main hangar. He was a man in his 40s, with deep scars on his face and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. He gathered all the new recruits in formation. "We are not here to make you heroes," he said, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "We are here to make you weapons. The Zero is the finest fighter aircraft in the world. Faster, more maneuverable, with greater range than any American plane. But it has one weakness that you need to understand from the first day." Takashi exchanged glances with the boy next to him, a thin young man named Kenji, who had arrived from Osaka the day before. "The Zero has no armor," Saito continued. "No bulletproof glass. No self-sealing fuel tanks. We sacrificed protection for speed and range. This means that a single bullet in the wrong place can turn you into a fireball in seconds. 80% of you will not return from your missions. 80% will die in the sky, in the sea, or burning inside your cockpits." Silence fell over the group like a heavy blanket. Some boys lowered their heads. Others clenched their fists. Takashi felt his heart racing, but he kept his gaze fixed on the commander. The training began immediately. Every day before dawn, they ran 5 kilometers around the base. Then, hours of technical study: engine mechanics, navigation, combat tactics. In the afternoon, flight simulations in wooden structures that mimicked the Zero's cockpit. At night, lectures on Bushido, the way of the warrior, and the importance of sacrifice for the emperor and the nation. Takashi proved to be a natural pilot. His first real flight was a transcendent experience. When he took off and felt the Zero respond to his commands, climbing into the blue sky over Kyushu, he understood why so many were willing to die for those few moments of absolute freedom. Up there were no social classes, no poverty, no hunger. There was only the sky, the machine, and him. But reality soon imposed itself. In the 3rd week of training, during a formation exercise, one of the recruits, a boy named Hiroshi, lost control during a turn. His Zero went into a spin and crashed into the ocean. There was no time for rescue. The plane sank in seconds, taking Hiroshi with it. That night, in the barracks, no one could sleep. Kenji, lying in the bunk next to Takashi, whispered in the darkness, "Do you think it is worth it? Do you think we will really make a difference?" Takashi did not know what to answer. He thought of his mother, who had sold her wedding kimono to buy him a train ticket to the base. He thought of his sister, who believed he would return a hero. He thought of his father, who had worked until his last breath without ever complaining. "We have no choice," Takashi finally replied. "This is what we were called to do." But deep in his heart, a question was beginning to form. A question that many of those boys were secretly asking themselves, but that no one dared to say out loud. What if the real enemy was not the Americans in the sky, but the men who sent them to die in unprotected machines, knowing that most would never return? Commander Saito stood at the window of his office, watching the young recruits walking toward the barracks. He lit a cigarette and closed his eyes. He had trained 5 previous groups. He knew exactly what awaited each of those boys. And every night, the faces of the dead haunted his sleep. 3 months passed like a storm. The training intensified to unbearable levels. Takashi and the other pilots flew 6 hours a day, practicing dive attacks, evasive maneuvers, and dog-fighting techniques. But something changed when the first combat reports began arriving from the Pacific Front. The news was devastating. Entire squadrons were being decimated. The Americans had developed new tactics and their pilots were becoming more experienced. Worse still, the new American fighters, the Hellcats and Corsairs, were faster and much better armored than before. The technological advantage that Japan once had was disappearing rapidly. One afternoon, Commander Saito gathered Takashi and 5 other top pilots in a private meeting. His face was graver than usual. "You 6 have been selected for a special mission," he announced. "In 2 weeks, you will escort a transport convoy to the Philippines. Intelligence reports indicate heavy American naval presence in the area. Your chances of encountering enemy fighters are 90%. Takashi felt his stomach tighten. This was real now. No more simulations, no more exercises over safe waters. That evening, he wrote a letter to his mother. His hands trembled as he held the pen. He wanted to tell her he was afraid, that he did not want to die at 19 without having lived, without having loved, without having seen his sister grow up. But instead, he wrote about duty, honor, and how proud she should be. Kenji found him sitting alone near the runway, watching the sunset. "I heard about the mission," Kenji said, sitting beside him. "They say the Americans have 4 aircraft carriers in that region. For carriers means hundreds of fighters." Takashi said nothing. He just watched the orange sky slowly turn purple. "My father was a fisherman," Kenji continued, his voice breaking. "He died in a storm when I was 7. My mother told me he knew the weather was bad. But he went out anyway because we needed the money. Sometimes I wonder if bravery and stupidity are the same thing." "They are not," Takashi replied, though he was not sure he believed his own words. The next day, during a routine training flight, tragedy struck again. 2 Zeros collided during a formation maneuver. Both pilots ejected, but only one parachute opened. Takashi watched from his cockpit as his companion, a 20-year-old boy named Masao, fell like a stone into the sea. The sound of the impact, even from that distance, was something he would never forget. When they returned to base, Commander Saito did not cancel the day's activities. "There was no time for mourning," he said. "There was no time for weakness. The war did not wait for anyone to be ready." That night, Takashi stared at the ceiling of the barracks, unable to sleep. Around him, he could hear the muffled sobs of other pilots who no longer believed they would survive. The morning of the mission arrived wrapped in thick fog. Takashi woke up before dawn, his body tense and his mind racing. He put on his flight suit slowly, each movement feeling like a ritual. Around him, the other 5 selected pilots prepared in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. At the briefing, Commander Saito spread a map across the table. His finger traced the route they would take. "You will fly at low altitude to avoid radar detection. The convoy is here," he pointed to a spot in the Philippine Sea. "Your job is simple. Protect those ships at all costs. If American fighters appear, engage them and buy time for the convoy to escape." Simple, Takashi thought bitterly. Nothing about flying an unarmored plane into a sky full of enemy fighters was simple. But then something unexpected happened. A young intelligence officer, Lieutenant Nakamura, entered the room carrying a folder. He looked nervous, almost frightened. "Commander, we have new intelligence," he said quietly. "The American carrier group has been reinforced. Our sources indicate at least 60 fighters in the area, possibly more." Sato's jaw tightened. He looked at the 6 pilots standing before him. Boys, really. Children wearing the uniforms of warriors. "The mission parameters remain the same," Saito said, but his voice had lost its usual firmness. After the briefing, as the pilots walked toward their planes, Saito pulled Takashi aside. For a moment, the hard mask the commander always wore seemed to crack. "Yamamoto, listen to me carefully. Up there, when the bullets start flying, forget everything we taught you about honor and sacrifice. Your first priority is to survive. Do you understand? Survive. Come back. The Empire needs experienced pilots more than it needs dead heroes." Takashi was stunned. This was the opposite of everything Saito had preached for months. "Why are you telling me this, sir?" "Because I am tired of writing letters to mothers," Saito replied, his eyes glistening. "Because 80% is not just a statistic. It is faces, names, dreams that will never be realized. And because someone needs to live long enough to tell the truth about what happened here. Those words changed something fundamental in Takashi. For the first time, he understood that survival was not cowardice. It was resistance. It was a form of victory. If you are rooting for Takashi and these young pilots, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. The real battle is just beginning, and what happens next will change everything. As Takashi climbed into his Zero's cockpit, he made a silent decision. He would fight, yes, but he would also do everything possible to bring himself and his companions back alive. The mission was important, but their lives were more important. The engines roared to life. One by one, the 6 Zeros took off into the gray morning sky, heading toward an uncertain destiny. They flew for 2 hours over the endless Pacific Ocean. The water below stretched like a vast blue mirror, beautiful and merciless. Takashi kept his formation tight, constantly scanning the horizon. His radio crackled with occasional updates from the convoy below. Then Kenji's voice broke through the static, tense and urgent. Bogies at 2 o'clock high. Multiple contacts. Takashi's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked up and saw them. Dark silhouettes against the clouds, descending like birds of prey. American Hellcats. Not 6 or 10. Dozens of them. Break formation, Takashi shouted into his radio. Engage at will. Protect the convoy. What happened next was chaos. The sky erupted into a deadly ballet of metal and fire. Takashi threw his Zero into a hard turn, feeling the G-forces crushing his body. A Hellcat roared past him, its guns blazing. Tracer rounds lit up the air like deadly fireflies. He remembered Sato's words. Survive. Come back. Takashi locked onto an American fighter and fired a burst. The round struck home and the Hellcat's engine began smoking. But there was no time to celebrate. 2 more were on his tail. He dove hard, pushing the Zero to its limits. The plane screamed in protest but responded. This was what the Zero was built for. Speed, maneuverability, grace in the face of death. One by one, the American fighters peeled off, unable to match his turns. But Takashi knew the truth. They did not need to match him. They just needed one lucky shot. The radio erupted with desperate calls. One of their pilots was hit. Then another. Takashi saw a Zero spiral down, trailing black smoke. He could not tell whose it was. Kenji's voice cut through the noise, surprisingly calm. Takashi, I am hit. Fuel tank is leaking. I cannot make it back to base. No, Takashi shouted. Stay with me. We can make it to the convoy. Ditch near the ships. There was a long pause. Then Kenji spoke again, and there was something like peace in his voice. Tell my mother I thought of her. Tell her the sky was beautiful today. The explosion was a flash of orange and black against the blue. Takashi watched his friend disappear, reduced to falling debris and smoke. Something broke inside him then. Not his courage, not his will to live, but his innocence. The last piece of the boy who had arrived at the base 6 months ago died with Kenji in that burning sky. He fought with a fury he did not know he possessed. He shot down 2 more Hellcats, his movements precise and merciless. Around him, the remaining Zeros fought just as desperately. The battle lasted 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. When the Americans finally withdrew, only 3 Zeros remained flying. 3 out of 6. The convoy was safe. The mission was a success. But as Takashi turned his battered Zero toward home, he felt nothing but emptiness. The landing was rough. Takashi's Zero had taken damage he had not noticed during the fight. Bullet holes peppered the fuselage and the landing gear barely held as the wheels touched the runway. Ground crew rushed toward the 3 surviving planes, their faces a mixture of relief and sorrow. Commander Saito stood near the hangar watching. When Takashi climbed out of the cockpit, his legs nearly gave out. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind only exhaustion and grief. 3 out of 6, Saito said quietly as Takashi approached. You did well, Yamamoto. Takashi looked at him with hollow eyes. Did well? Kenji is dead. Watanabe is dead. Sudo is dead. Half of us are gone. But half of you survived, Saito replied. In this war, that is a miracle. Over the following weeks, something shifted at the base. The new recruits who arrived looked even younger than before. 15, 16 years old. Boys who should have been in school, not learning how to die in the sky. Japan was running out of experienced pilots. The 80% mortality rate was becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Takashi was promoted and assigned to train the newcomers. He found himself standing where Saito had stood months earlier, looking at frightened young faces and knowing most of them would not survive their first combat mission. But he refused to lie to them the way he had been lied to. He told them the truth. The Zero is a magnificent aircraft, he said during his first training session. But it will not protect you. Only your skill, your instinct, and sometimes pure luck will keep you alive. Forget the propaganda about glorious death. Stay alive. That is your first duty. Some officers complained about his unorthodox approach. But Saito protected him. The old commander had changed too. The weight of all those deaths had bent something in him that could not be straightened again. One evening, Takashi found Saito burning a stack of letters in a metal drum behind the headquarters building. Letters to families. Letters that would never be sent because there was no time, because there were too many, because words could not explain what was happening. They are sending children now, Saito said, watching the flames consume the paper. 15-year-old children. And we are teaching them to fly machines designed to be coffins. Then why do we keep doing it? Takashi asked. Saito was quiet for a long moment. Because if we stop, if we refuse, they will just find someone else to do it. At least we can try to keep some of them alive. At least we can teach them the truth. In August 1945, everything changed. The news came through official channels but spread through whispers first. 2 cities destroyed. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Weapons beyond comprehension. And then the unthinkable. The Emperor's voice on the radio. Surrender. The war was over. Takashi had survived. Against all odds, against the 80% he had survived. But survival, he was learning, came with its own burden. Tokyo, 1965. 20 years had passed since the war ended. Takashi Yamamoto stood in front of a new aviation museum, watching as workers carefully positioned a restored Mitsubishi Zero in the main exhibition hall. He was 39 years old now, his hair beginning to gray at the temples. He worked as a civilian flight instructor, teaching young Japanese how to fly for peaceful purposes. Commercial aviation, cargo transport, tourism. A reporter approached him. She was young, probably born after the war ended. Mr. Yamamoto, you are one of the few surviving Zero pilots. What do you think when you see this aircraft now? Takashi was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on the polished metal of the plane's wing. I think about the boys who never came home, he finally said. I think about Kenji, who wanted to be a teacher. About Watanabe, who loved to paint. About the thousands of young men who climbed into these beautiful, deadly machines and never climbed out. The reporter shifted uncomfortably. But you were heroes, fighting for your country. Takashi shook his head slowly. We were children sent to die in unarmored planes because our leaders valued speed over our lives. 80% of Zero pilots died. Not because we lacked courage or skill, but because we flew machines designed for performance, not survival. That is not heroism. That is sacrifice born from desperation. He walked around the Zero, his fingers tracing the lines of the cockpit. Do you know what I learned up there in the sky? That every enemy pilot I faced was someone's son, someone's brother. That we were all just boys trying to survive a war we did not start. The real tragedy was not that we fought. It was that we had to. His eyes grew distant, seeing things the reporter could never understand. Commander Saito died in 1950. Heart attack. But Takashi knew it was really all those deaths, all those letters, all that guilt that killed him. Now Takashi spent his days teaching a new generation to fly. But he taught them something else too. That human life was worth more than any mission. That coming home was not cowardice. That questioning orders was not weakness. Some nights he still dreamed of that August morning. Of Kenji's last words. Of the orange explosion against the blue sky. He would wake up with tears on his face, his wife holding him, whispering that it was over, that he was safe. But it was never truly over. The ghosts of the 80% would always fly beside him. As Takashi left the museum, a group of schoolchildren ran past, laughing and free. He smiled. This was what they had died for, he told himself. Not for empire or glory, but for this. For children who would never have to choose between honor and survival. For a sky that belonged to everyone. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. If this journey moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling us which story you would like to hear next. Your support keeps these important stories alive. See you in the next video.